The LA Times would describe Sugar Ray as Orange County's quintessential unthinking man's rock band and the Beavis and Butthead of rock bands. Spin magazine, meanwhile, referred to them as the least likely to succeed party band. Sugar Ray wouldn't really enjoy success until their second record, and would be a song that was an anomaly on the album that gave them their big break. But the song almost never got recorded and resulted in the band nearly splitting up. The story of Sugar Ray begins with frontman Mark McGrath. Actually, it begins with boxer Sugar Ray Leonard, who would serve as the inspiration for the band's name. Now we can talk about vocalist Mark McGrath. He would be born in 1968 to an Irish Catholic family in Hartford, Connecticut. It was at the age of 5 he began singing in front of his mother's mirror while pretending to play guitar, most notably to the Knack's My Sharona, and he would also pretend he was Kiss guitarist Ace Frehley. While McGrath would admit that he had no musical talent at a young age, he did have a lot of charisma. It was by the age of 8, in 1976, his parents moved across the country to California. But McGrath was less than enthusiastic about it, recalling to Spin, "I knew when we came out to California that my parents would get divorced. All I ever heard about Los Angeles was that everyone gets divorced. It tortured me every day." Then, of course, 5 years after we moved, they got divorced. I remember hiding it from everybody. It resulted in McGrath becoming more guarded and insular, and school didn't prove to be a sanctuary for him as well, as he wasn't a popular kid, having acne. It would result in McGrath having to find his own identity, with him at one point pretending to be a goth who was into groups like The Cult, but at the same time, he secretly listened to more poppy acts like Duran Duran and started to get into hip-hop. Despite dealing with the shock of his parents' divorce, he was mostly a good kid in his teenage years, not really drinking or engaging in drug use. Instead, he'd flirt with breakdancing and eventually became a pretty accomplished basketball player. But soon enough, playing music would take over his life. It would be Sex Pistols and Black Flag who would prove to be McGrath's biggest influences. But also during the decade, McGrath found himself becoming a fan of hip-hop, telling the San Pedro News pilot, "Although I can't forget my punk roots, I'm a hip-hop fan now." Meanwhile, elsewhere in Newport Beach, guitarist Rodney Shepherd met a drummer named Stan Frazier at an amusement park. They were also students at Corona Del Mar High School. Both guys were mod revivalists, with Shepherd telling Spin, "I saw these guys wearing jam buttons and I'm like, oh my god, you're mods too." Both came from musical families, and Shepherd's family hailed from Trinidad. The pair soon started a covers band that played mostly British music, including groups like The Jam, Small Faces, as well as The Who. They would call themselves the Tories, named after the English Conservative Party, who was in power at the time. While the band's popularity, of course, didn't extend far outside of garages and house parties in Newport Beach, they did find a fan in a young Mark McGrath. In Newport Beach, it was pretty common for parents to go away on weekends, leaving their kids at home. Now, the kids would frequently have parties, and it was at one of those parties McGrath met the members of the Tories. That night, McGrath would perform a cover of AC/DC's Back in Black, and soon enough, he joined the band. It was around 1987, 1988, they formed a new band called Shrinky Dinks. By McGrath's own admission, the musicians in Shrinky Dinks knew that they weren't very good musicians, as they really couldn't write their own material. He would reveal on the Tuna on Toast podcast with Stryker that they wrote a few original tunes with titles like Lick Me and Gold Digger, but most of the time they would just do covers by Sex Pistols, Loverboy, Judas Priest, The Cult, Blondie, Motorhead, and Run DMC. Shrinky Dinks soon became the go-to band for any college frat party in places like Newport Beach, Santa Barbara, as well as San Diego. McGrath's stage antics soon became the primary focus for the band, frequently drawing comparisons to Iggy Pop. And it wasn't uncommon during Shrinky Dinks live shows for McGrath to hurl cans of beer into the audience, or for him to wield a hockey stick on stage like an axe. He would also climb on the walls of the venue and hang from the rafters. But his bad behavior would soon earn him death threats, with McGrath telling the LA Times that he did those antics to deal with the insecurity he had about his voice, recalling, "I used to scream and yell, any kind of antics to get away from my voice." But stage antics and cover tunes were not going to help Shrinky Dinks make a career in music. They knew they had to write their own material, and it would be a song called Caboose that changed their fortunes. While Shrinky Dinks did not have an exhaustive list of original songs, they did have great stage presence. It would be McGrath's best friend of nearly 4 years, a guy named McG, who would later on become a huge music video and movie director. But by the early 90s, he was still making a name for himself, and he offered to do a video shoot for Shrinky Dinks' song Caboose. But rather than sending every record label in a telephone book a demo tape of, 3 to 4 songs, the band got pretty creative. They took the video they shot for Caboose, put it in a pizza box, and sent it out to MTV, management companies, and record labels. It would be Rick Rubin's team at his Deaf American label who called the band, but things didn't work out as planned. He didn't offer to sign the group. Instead, he thought their marketing was great and asked the members to join the street team to promote the label's artists. Obviously, they said no to the offer, and they would soon get a call from 2 guys from a management company, one of which was named Chip Quigley, who'd go on to become Sugar Ray's longtime manager. Chip loved the video for Caboose and played it for Atlantic Records president Doug Morris in late 1993, who wanted to sign the band. McGrath would reveal on the band's website, "We totally lied to Atlantic. We told them we had a big following from San Diego to Los Angeles. That certainly wasn't the case. There was no social media or way for them to check though. We told them we had 100 songs and we only had 2. Caboose ended up on our first album and the other, Lick Me, didn't for obvious reasons." Shrinky Dinks managed to sign a $1 million 2-album deal with Atlantic Records based solely on the video for Caboose. Following their signing with the label, the band was threatened with legal action by toy maker Milton Bradley over infringing on their name Shrinky Dinks. They soon rebranded themselves Sugar Ray, with McGrath telling the San Francisco Examiner that the band chose to name themselves after the 80s era boxer Sugar Ray Leonard, not the 50s era fighter Sugar Ray Robinson. McGrath would tell the paper, "He was the fighter we were more aware of. We chose it because it was a piece of Americana, like Ford cars and 7-Up. You have to look at the name as the representation of America as a whole. The good, positive part of America." Sugar Ray's first album, 1995's Lemonade and Brownies, would be an ode to what the band referred to as their Animal House days. The title is a schoolyard reference for bodily fluids. The record would see the group relocate from Newport Beach to Los Angeles since it was cheaper, and the influences on the album ran the gamut from R&B, punk, metal, and funk. But critics were pretty brutal towards the band. A 1995 review from the Los Angeles Times would have the headline, "Witless Juvenilia with a Beat." They would go on to add, "With the album's cheesecake artwork and infantile toilet humor title, it's clear that Sugar Ray is factoring its appeal down to lowest denominators with this debut CD." I mean, they had a song on the record called Danzig Needs a Hug, with McGrath recalling to a California paper, "He's just an angry person, but I see a nice guy through and through, and I'd like to give him a hug." You also had tracks like Drive By, which isn't what you imagine, a humorous take on a taco order gone wrong. And of course, the song Streaker, which may have been inspired by Frasier, who once streaked through a movie theater during a showing of Jurassic Park. It was a hobby he seemed to have given up though after he grew tired of being arrested. The band even handed in their finished album to their label wearing nothing but football helmets, jockstraps, combat boots, and nothing else. Despite not having any radio or MTV hits in America, Sugar Ray had 2 things that were working in their favor. They found popularity overseas in Europe, with McGrath crediting the popularity of bands like Rage Against the Machine as helping. Lemonade and Brownies was enough of a success overseas that Atlantic Records kept giving the band money to do 7 or so tours of the continent, and they would play alongside Deftones and Monster Magnet. But back in America, Sugar Ray only did 1 tour opening for Korn and Lords of Brooklyn. Due to McGrath and company having heavy material in their sets, they were actually pretty well received. Sugar Ray would get a little bit of airplay on MTV and on rock stations in San Francisco, Los Angeles, and Seattle. As for that woman on the cover, which I can't show on YouTube because it's too graphic, that was Baywatch star Nicole Eggert, and McGrath would recall to the San Francisco Examiner how so many program directors actually played the record because of the cover photo when most albums that came across their desk ended up in the trash. Eggert didn't even get paid for the cover shoot because it was done as a favor to McGrath and company, as the frontman was dating her best friend at the time. McGrath would tell the Examiner, "Our songwriting has definitely improved since then, but at the time it wasn't one of our strengths. Our inventiveness was." Unfortunately, all the promotion in the world didn't help the album succeed, with it selling about 50,000 copies by 1997. With the group's first album proving to be a disappointment commercially, Atlantic Records floated the proposition of just buying the band out of their contract. Sugar Ray still had 2 shows left on their American tour, and it would be one of Mark McGrath's friends who worked with Atlantic in the metal department who saw a golden opportunity. McGrath's friends suggested that Sugar Ray should do a cover of shock jock Howard Stern's childhood band electric comic book song Psychedelic Beat. The Meat Puppets were originally supposed to cover the song, but something came up so they couldn't do it. Howard Stern loved Sugar Ray's cover and continued to play it on his show. Atlantic was so enthusiastic about the publicity, they flew the band out to New York and put them up in hotels to appear on Stern's program to perform the song live. Years later, McGrath would credit Stern with saving the band's career, and to pay homage to Stern, they would include a cover of Psychedelic Beat on their Greatest Hits album years later. The momentum from their Stern appearance was enough to convince Atlantic to let the group have a shot at recording a second album. Unlike the first album, which was recorded in California, the band recorded their second album in New York for a few reasons. To one, get away from the distractions of home, and to be close to their label's head office. Sugar Ray would also bring in famed producer David Kahn to work on their second record titled Floored. Kahn was fresh off working with Sublime, who released their massive self-titled album. By 1996, Sugar Ray didn't even have fully fleshed out songs, but they had bits and pieces of ideas. They had a new member in DJ Homicide, whose legal name is Craig Bullock. Frazier would recall to the Baltimore Sun, "Things were not going well. We were about to get dropped. We were in New York, and it was really depressing." But Kahn would be instrumental in helping the band finish their songs for the record. According to McGrath, who told the Tune on Toast podcast, Kahn was pretty no-nonsense and blunt about what he liked and didn't like, at one point telling the frontman he couldn't sing. But Kahn assured McGrath that if he listened to him, they could have a hit song off the record. One of the songs born during those sessions with Kahn would be the track Fly, with the Baltimore Sun describing how it came together, writing, "Karga started noodling a 2-chord figure on his bass, and Bullock fell in and scratched out a beat on his turntable. Shepard entered with an airy descending guitar hook, and Frazier got up from his drum kit, grabbed the microphone, and started singing what he felt, which was a need to escape the band's dismal condition at that moment." However, Fly wasn't an easy sell to frontman Mark McGrath, who upon listening to the song hated it so much he nearly quit the group. He would storm out of the rehearsal space. At the time, McGrath felt the band should be focusing on heavier songs, but it would be the close friend McG who actually talked some sense into him, with him recalling to the LA Times. McG had been very involved from day one as a psychologist, therapist, and musical collaborator. He said, "Where else are you going to go? Work at Del Taco?" Also a big fan of the song was David Kahn. That was enough of a pep talk to get McGrath to give the song a shot. McGrath would tell a California paper, "The first time I heard that, this was the worst piece of you-know-what I'd ever heard. I almost quit the group because of it. But then I said, let's see what I can add to it. Originally, it had a lush, flowing vibe to it. I changed some things. I'm the one that thought about having a Jamaican dancehall artist Supercat on it. There was also some discussion about getting Weird Al to appear on the song, according to an interview they gave to the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. But Kahn only knew how to get a hold of Supercat, and so he appeared on the song. McGrath would admit that the body of the song took 5 minutes to write. Due to marketing concerns, the band's label would release 2 versions of Fly on Floored in an attempt to appease radio stations who didn't like the Jamaican feel of the track, or just rapping in general. Shepard would tell the Hartford Courant about the band's displeasure with having a compromise, saying, "It's one of the compromises you have to make at this level. Certain radio stations wouldn't play it with a guy rapping on it. When the video got added to MTV, they edited the whole middle, the rap part, maybe to make it shorter. We call it the racist video version." Released as the lead single from their second album, Fly would become a massive hit, topping the US Billboard Hot 100 airplay charts for 4 consecutive weeks, and spending 8 weeks at the #1 spot on the Modern Rock Tracks chart. It soon became the hit of the summer in 1997. While Fly would give the band their breakout hit, it was an anomaly on Floored, an album that featured a wide array of hip-hop, ska, pop, heavy metal, and punk. The video was also notable because it featured the band members' mothers. McGrath would tell the Montreal Gazette, "Growing up, I loved my mom and dad dearly, even though I sort of went through that they don't know everything, I know everything phase." Maybe it's an idealistic way of thinking, but maybe it can help bridge the gap between parents and kids. It certainly makes things more personable. Anyone can relate to families. Certainly in the past, it hasn't been the most rock and roll thing to put your mom in a video. There were rumors that the song Fly was originally written in a crack house, but McGrath would clarify where it was written, telling the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, well, it wasn't a crack house, but there were junkies and hookers and everything on different floors and out on the streets. It was really pretty seedy, but it gave us inspiration. At the end of the day, Florid would end up selling around 2 million copies, going double platinum. Despite the band's newfound success, critics wrote them off as a new breed of one-hit wonders. The LA Times was particularly savage, writing in 1997, instant karma was going to get Sugar Ray, and no rock band deserved it more. Spin, meanwhile, would refer to the band as Orange County's least likely to succeed. Others would slam the band for riding the coattails of Sublime. McGrath would remark, "As for the Sublime comparisons, I love that band. We got David Kahn to produce our album because of his work with Sublime. I don't think if you heard our album that every song is like Sublime, but I agree there are elements there. Fly was written before Sublime's album came out." As for the tagline of being one-hit wonders, McGrath would tell a paper, "I was thinking of that term the other day, one-hit wonder, and every word in there is positive. You can't go through life thinking, man, we just had one hit. Do you know how many bands go around wishing they could just be signed to a label?" Then there were internet rumors in 1997 that McGrath was actually rapper Vanilla Ice, who rebranded himself. In response, the band started covering the famous tune Ice Ice Baby. But just because the band had a ton of success with Fly and Florid, by late 1997, McGrath gave an interview where he mentioned that the band was still in so much debt to their label and hadn't seen a single penny from record sales. He'd remark having to borrow $62 from his dad to pay his pager bill. As for their second record, some fans of the single Fly were disappointed with what they heard upon purchasing the album. They thought the other songs would be just like the single, and they weren't. This kind of reminds me of what happened with another band who had a huge record the same year, Smash Mouth. Side note, guys, I've done a whole video on the career of Smash Mouth, the link is down below. But Sugar Ray would answer back against critics, with drummer Stan Frazier telling the Morning Call newspaper, "Being diverse is not a good idea in the music industry. Everybody is used to hearing a band and they just do one type of song. We couldn't do that here. Everybody in the band contributes and everybody has their own taste. So of course you're going to end up with all sorts of songs." That does it for today's video, guys. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again in Rock and Roll True Stories.